Move on and get started. So once again, welcome everyone to this event. We're going to cover deferred enrollment MBA programs. In particular, we're going to talk with representatives from 4 schools. Just as a brief introduction, my name's Graham Richmond, and I'm the co-founder of ClearAdmit. I'm going to moderate today's session. Mostly, I'll try to stay out of the way so we can hear from our guests and all the great insights they invariably will share. But let's move on and just introduce everyone to get started here. So first up, we've got Catherine Alford. She's the Director of Admissions for the Future Year Scholars Program at UVA Darden. Welcome, Catherine.
Thanks for having me, Graham.
It's always a pleasure. Nice to see you again. Next up, we're going to also hear from Donna Levinson, who's the Assistant Dean of Admissions at MIT Sloan. Welcome, Donna.
Hi, thank you very much for including us.
A pleasure. We're also going to hear from Jake Kohler, who is the Director of the Moelis Advanced Access Program over at Wharton. Hey, Jake.
Hey, Graham, and thanks again. Looking forward to talking with everybody.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And last but not least, we've got Bruce Delmonico, who's the Assistant Dean for Admissions at the Yale School of Management. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks so much, Graham. It's great to be here and great to have everyone on this session.
Excellent. So let's sort of dive right in and start with a couple of, just kind of a basic overview, because I feel like, a lot of the folks that are joining us are undergrads. Maybe they're currently in a, master's program that they started immediately after undergrad, but the lion's share are probably undergrads. And I just want to make sure that people have a clear understanding of like, what is a deferred MBA versus a traditional full-time MBA. And essentially, all you need to know is that in kind of historically, people would go to college, graduate, work for a few years, then apply to business school and go off and get an MBA. And all that the sort of deferred enrollment MBA is offering is the opportunity for you as a college student, or maybe as a master's student who's gone direct, to apply to business school before you do your work experience, secure a seat in a class, and then join usually anywhere from 2 to 5 years after you get the offer. Now, there is one big exception in Yale's program, which we'll get into as we go through here. But essentially, you're sort of securing a seat in a future class, and it's a really interesting opportunity. I think, as someone who did an MBA the old-fashioned way, I would have really liked to have the opportunity to kind of secure my spot while I was still a senior in college. So we'll kind of dive in here with a couple of roundtable questions to help explore this further. So I want to, just sort of take us through, and we'll start with Catherine over at UVA Darden. But I wanted to know, Catherine, like, why should someone consider a deferred enrollment or early access MBA, as they're sometimes called? And also, if you're willing, like, when might it be better for a candidate to not consider it and just hold off and follow that traditional path?
Thanks, Graham. I would say the better question is why not? So there are, for a lot of our schools, first and foremost, it's free to apply. So doesn't cost anything. And then the other schools that do have an application fee, it's actually a reduced application fee from their full-time MBA program. So it's cost effective to apply through a deferred enrollment program. And going through that MBA application process will force you to do a lot of introspection that will help you holistically, not with just the application process, but also with recruiting for jobs and self-awareness in general. You'll learn a great deal. The second reason is you can get standardized testing out of the way. So studies show that students who take a GMAT or GRE while they're still in college perform better than students who wait until they're working professionally to take a standardized test. Your brain is just in test-taking mode because you've been taking tests your whole life. And once you start working, your brain starts working in different ways. And so standardized testing doesn't come back as readily. So tests are good for 5 years. So you can hold on to that score for a longer period of time. And then the last reason to consider a deferred enrollment program is that it gives you the confidence to take some risks. For example, we had a student admitted to Darden through our deferred enrollment program, went to work in private equity for a few years, but then became really interested in the startup space and wanted to know what it would be like to work in an operation role with a startup. And so having an offer to a top program in his back pocket, decided he could take a risk and take a job that wouldn't pay him as well as his private equity job did. And maybe the company didn't even work out well in the end, but it didn't matter because he knew he could take off and go to business school in just a few years. So it gives you a little bit more confidence in the early stages of your career. In terms of why would it be better for a candidate to hold off and follow the traditional MBA application path? I mean, I am biased. I have drunk the Kool-Aid. I think everybody needs an MBA. It is a leadership degree. It is a management degree for all industries, all functions. And so I would say the only reason to hold off is if you don't know about these programs yet. And or maybe you want to do something that is just really unrelated. But I can't figure out what is unrelated quite yet. Maybe one.
All right, Donna, how about you? Is there anything that you want to add to this? Like, why would someone want to consider deferred enrollment, or why not?
So I actually was taking notes because I love the way Catherine said everything, to be honest. But I do think that perhaps the candidate who might want to hold off a little bit, to be frank here, is somebody who perhaps did not do as well in their undergraduate. I mean, we have to assess people based on what they've done. And so if someone may not have done as well undergraduate and is hoping that, by working in a challenging profession where they can really demonstrate their abilities that offset their undergraduate, that may be one reason for somebody to potentially hold off on it. Otherwise, I really agree with everything that Catherine said.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think this point, and we'll get into it, I'm sure, as we go through today, but this idea that, you guys are looking at the information you've got from a candidate. And at this phase, if someone's in, college or university, obviously the grades and the courses and all that stuff they're doing on campus really matters. It's sort of under the lens a little bit. Jake, anything that you want to add on these roundtable questions as we get started here today?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is that ultimately, whether you apply through deferred enrollment or through the traditional means, you're going to the same destination. It's almost like taking two different avenues to the same place. The deferred enrollment, the early access avenue, starts at an earlier time. As Catherine and Donna said, like, there's lots of benefits to being able to hop on that avenue. And for each of the programs, there's different benefits you get along that avenue as well. So if you think about some of those benefits, if you want to hop on that, if you know this is a direction you see yourself going in, all there is value. And then on the other side of that, if it's not the right time to jump on the avenue, then there's still another avenue, 2 to 4 years or X number of years in the future. And we'll be excited to see you then too.
Can I add one thing?
Of course, Donna, yeah.
That I think might be a bit of a misperception, and it sort of plays into what Catherine said, why not? From our standpoint, and I'm guessing from the others on this call as well, it does not hurt you to apply now and not get in if and when you do apply 3 to 4 years down the road. And in fact, we've taken the steps to word our letter of not being able to take you, not even as a rejection level. We don't have enough information at this time. And so if people are concerned that this is my one shot, if I blow it now, then I'm hurting myself down the road, that is absolutely not the case.
Okay. Yeah, really helpful there. Bruce, I know we've heard a lot about this, but anything that you want to add on this sort of why should someone consider and why not?
No, I think that, I mean, not much I can really improve upon. I think Catherine really, said it all incredibly well, and so Donna and Jake had some great additional insights. I would emphasize, and I don't want to be program specific, but Silver Scholars, we are a little bit different in that you go straight to the MBA right after undergraduate. And I think this is especially true for that, but I think for all of these, deferred admission or early MBA programs, the benefit is to some degree is the opportunity cost that you are is less earlier on. The more you work, the more you're entrenched in your career, the more difficult it is to kind of uproot yourself and then sort of step away, get the MBA, and then step back. And so I think there is so there's certain economies and certain efficiencies, so lower opportunity costs for getting the MBA earlier, and it can really have greater impact sooner. So it can accelerate your career that much more quickly. So I think there is, just to emphasize, I think Catherine made this point very eloquently, but just to emphasize that a little bit more.
Yeah, I love what I'm hearing here, especially about, this idea that, look, it's not like it's going to hurt you if you were to apply and try to take this path and tap into all those, that avenue that Jake was talking about. There's not, it doesn't seem like, I mean, generally speaking, in MBA admissions, I don't feel like reapplicants have ever really been at a big disadvantage. That's what I love about MBA admissions. There's this openness to people coming back. And it sounds like that's certainly the case in this instance, where someone might apply as a senior in college and then show up in a few years. I mean, gosh, you're a different person at that point. You've done so many other things. So let's keep moving along here. For the next kind of portion here, as we move out of the quick roundtables, I just wanted to make sure that those tuning in have a rough idea as to what goes into an application for one of these programs. And, surprise, surprise, it's very similar to what you would provide if you were applying to the MBA program after having worked for a few years. There's an application form. There may or may not be a fee. Most programs seem to waive the fee when you're applying to these, early kind of access offerings. You'd have to send your college transcripts. Most programs will require a test, so you want to get the score into the schools. Resume is often a part, essays or short answers, recommendations. Most of these programs have an interview, and then for international students, there might be a language exam requirement. So just some of the basics there so that people know kind of what they're getting into. Just as a housekeeping thing, I wanted to remind everyone that we're recording today's session. We'll get it to you via email. So just don't feel forced to write everything down or take notes. Just relax and enjoy the session. And we also will take Q&A, but we're going to do it individually, school by school at the end. Each school is going to jump into their own Zoom breakout where you can interact with the reps that are here and ask them your questions. So just hang on for that at the end. Here are the application deadlines. Most schools have one in April. UVA has that extra one a little bit later on in the calendar year, but just to have those on your radar here, because we're a couple months out, which is why I think the timing of this session is perfect in terms of you all having just enough time to kind of get things ready. So that's just a reminder as to when the deadlines are. And then moving right along here, I want to get into, this is kind of the meat of our session today. We want to give each program a chance to sort of speak to their program and give us, ideally, introduce us to one aspect of the program that makes it different from the traditional MBA path. So what is it about, the way that they've structured their deferred enrollment? I think we'll get into some of the things that Jake was referring to, this sort of avenue that you get on early here, and also to highlight a piece of the admissions process that you want candidates to be aware of. So we'll start with you, Catherine. Just spend a couple minutes here, walk us through something about your program and then something about your process that you want us to know about.
Sure. So as Jake pointed out earlier, the program is the same. So it's the MBA program from Darden, but there are different pathways to getting there. So you can work for several years before applying, or you can apply right during your final year of undergraduate study or your one-year master's program and gain admission to Darden at that time. Then you go work for 2 to 5 years before matriculating. The benefit to taking the deferred enrollment pathway to the MBA is that you get to join a network and community of other future year scholars, as well as the Darden network, which can be incredibly helpful as you're trying to explore different career paths. I've seen our enrolled future year scholars reach out to other future year scholars in the network who are doing interesting work. And I've seen one of our future year scholars hire another one from a conversation they had through our LinkedIn group. So the networking is really helpful. I would also say we provide a lot of career support for our future year scholars through inviting them to a lot of different conversations with our career team and with our other students to help our admitted students get a better plan in place for how they're going to navigate the recruiting process when they arrive in business school. And then lastly, our students who apply to the Future Year Scholars Program are also evaluated for scholarship at 2 different points in the process. So one, when they apply as a Future Year Scholar, and then again, when they indicate their intent to matriculate. One aspect of our admissions process that I would want to highlight that might be a little bit different from other programs is that we are test flexible, which means we also accept the ACT and SAT in lieu of the GMAT or GRE. Whether or not that's a choice you want to make, applying with an SAT or ACT, there are different factors to weigh into consideration, but that is something that I think is important to know.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for shedding some light there. I think at some point I'm going to ask you guys, well, actually, I don't know if you'll humor me, Catherine. When does someone have to tell you that they're going to matriculate. So let's say I apply as a senior, I'm a senior in college, I get in, and then I'm in this sort of pipeline and connected to other future scholars in the Darden community. But are you checking in with me each year to say, hey, are you coming? When are you going to start? Are you coming next season? And if so, what's the date that I have to tell you by to get in for the following, say I'm going to start on campus the following fall or something?
Sure. So this is something that's going to vary significantly between different deferred enrollment programs. For Darden, we allow you to decide whether or not you're going to matriculate at 4 different times throughout the course of of the year. And that coincides with each of our application deadlines for our full-time MBA program.
Interesting. Okay. So you basically would, yeah, so it just follows the regular MBA program deadlines, and someone could alert you that and then they would just sort of fall in to the process with that round of candidate, I guess.
So that's where we're a little bit different too. So we actually supplemental applications. So it's just kind of a little bit of a checkpoint. We ask anyone who plans to matriculate to submit an updated resume so that we can see what they've been doing professionally since they last applied, an updated career goal essay so that we can make sure we can still help them reach their goals, and an updated letter of recommendation, just to make sure you're a great person to work with. Usually everything works out just seamlessly, but we do require that extra stepping stone before being fully admitted into the program.
Okay, good to know. I think that will differ a bit, so it's good that I asked this question. We'll kind of move on here. Let's go to you, Donna. Just going alphabetically. Tell us a little bit about the program, something you want to highlight, and then if there's any piece of the admissions process in particular you want us to be aware of.
Yep. So as you can see, it's all very similar. You're applying during your last year of undergraduate study or master's study. The key here is that you've had no prior work experience. You gain, we call it a conditional admit. I'm actually not worried. I think that's probably, we've had some flexibility with test taking over the last couple of years as a result of the pandemic. And so in some cases, we waived the test score. In others, we required it, but it didn't have to be, it could have been before they matriculated. And now what we've done is it actually aligns with the year in which you're going to matriculate, depending on whatever the requirement is for that particular year. And then again, you start after 2 to 5 years. We very much wanted to design the application process to pretty much mirror that of the traditional 2-year MBA process, because as we've now all pointed out, in the end, that's exactly the program that you're doing. And so the application itself looks very much like the traditional MBA application. I think we asked for an org chart for the 2-year MBA, and in this case, recognizing that people aren't working full-time, we've taken that out, but fundamentally, it's very similar, which means it includes an interview that is by invitation only, which is really a key part of our application process. Similarly, what was I just going to say that you asked? We, throughout that 2 to 5 year period, we have developed and are continuing to develop programming for our admits, for them to continue to feel like they're part of the community and feel connected to us as a school and take advantage of some limited career services, although access to lots of different career resources, as well as networking events that we hold for this group of individuals. The way the process actually works is once you hit the eligibility mark, so at the 2-year mark, we start reaching out every summer saying, is a year from now the right time? Is that, and if that's the case, you will let us know. We then reach out and have a call with you. Just, what have you been doing the last couple of years? Very similar to what Catherine said, just to make sure that we both agree it's the right time and a good fit. And I have to be honest, this past year, I had several calls where somebody wasn't quite sure. And after speaking with them, we mutually agreed that perhaps another year of experience would be worthwhile. So it was actually a really beneficial phone call. It wasn't just checking a box. We do ask for an updated resume, and we require people, we aren't as flexible. We have people fall in within our round 1 deadline. So they let us know, they complete a skeletal application just to really get in our system, which includes an updated resume. And then to secure their spot, they have to give us a deposit with all of the other round 1 admits.
Got it. Yeah, I think this is another thing that's really fascinating to me is this idea of going through that period after you graduate from university and while you're working as a part of a network, heading into, where you're going. And so you have this, I just thinking back to my personal experience, I was working, but I didn't know where I was going to go to business school at that point. And so I love the idea of these check-ins and this kind of connection to a community as you kind of go through your work experience. Let's move on and hear a little bit. I don't know if Jake is, here we go. Jake, so we've got you, same thing, what is it about the program that you want to highlight? Is there anything about the admissions process that you want us to know about?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so one thing that's different about applying through the Mullis Advanced Access Program versus applying to Wharton regularly, and I think the context of this is Wharton has a lot of interdisciplinary programs associated, things like the Lauder Institute, which is an MBA and MA joint degree, things like the JD MBA. And if you apply normally to those programs, you apply to that at the time of your application and you're admitted or not admitted to that specific program. For the Mullis program, because you have so much time before those arrive, you're applying just to the MBA and you can tack on those other joint programs, whether it's one of the ones I just mentioned or one of the other 14 plus that Wharton and the University of Pennsylvania offers, or some of our partner schools. So that's a nuance that is different than the broader MBA program at Wharton for sure. But the other thing that, and this ties into some of the benefits, things Catherine and others have talked about, but overwhelmingly, I think there's just so much value in those 2 to 4 years from admission and enrollment to arrival. We help facilitate a range of social and professional development opportunities, and the Mullis Fellows, the individuals who we refer to as those part of this program, spend a lot of time engaging with one another. We have an online community platform that they're able to engage with, and it's been amazing to see them support one another in really interesting ways that I didn't expect. So for instance, we have bankers in Hong Kong, throughout India, throughout Europe, throughout the US, and people in their first year analyst programs across these different countries being able to share insights with one another to make all of them that much better and more informed, even if they're not directly applying, I think is just of such incredible value. And the same is true for consultants. And the same is true. We have, I've been thinking of a couple individuals. One is a Teach for America core member in Honolulu, another's and Teach for India, and they're sharing insights with one another. And just like the value of having that network, in addition to being connected to some alumni, Wharton alumni, before you arrive and get this totally open, really developmentally powerful experience, I think is just so developmentally meaningful. So those are the things that are coming to mind. Graham, I don't know if I missed something in that rambling.
No, that's super helpful, and I love the idea of the banker in Hong Kong and the banker in New York or India, comparing notes on their experience and having this, as I said, this like community to kind of travel through your early professional days with. Yeah, let's move on and hear from Bruce because Bruce, your program's a little different. So yeah, just take a minute to let us know how kind of how it works, what you want to highlight there, and if there's anything about the process.
Yeah, sure, and I'm happy to talk about that. And it's true. I hinted at this. You mentioned this, Graham, earlier on, and I hinted at this in my previous answer. But Silver Scholars is structured differently from these other programs. So I do want to highlight that it's not really deferred enrollment. It's really direct enrollment. And the way the program works is you apply in your last year of undergraduate, and then you start with us at Yale immediately after you graduate, in the fall after you graduate. So if you graduate in the spring, or usually even if it's in mid cycle, so if you graduate in December or in mid year, you apply to us, and then you would start the following fall. So a few months later, and then you don't have the 2 to 5 years of work experience in between. You go straight from undergraduate to the MBA. And you don't do the 2 years back to back. What happens is it's a 3-year program total. So you will be, you'll have your MBA 3 years after you graduate from undergraduate. So it's definitely more accelerated. But the way it works is you do your first year, which is largely the core curriculum, right after you graduate from undergraduate. Then you do a 1-year extended internship after that. And then you come back in the third year, you come back for the second year of academic study. That's where you'll be taking electives with us. And the idea behind it, this was, we're in our, I guess this is, gosh, I think we're 20 years into this. So we've been around for a while. And the way this was originally conceived, the idea is that, and the philosophy behind it is that when you're best able to learn in the classroom right after you graduate from college, right after your undergraduate experience, you're in that academic mindset. So just continue in that academic path and do the first year of MBA. And then what happened, then the extended one-year internship allows you to test out the concepts you learned in the first year of the MBA, and then kind of develop that professional experience you don't otherwise have. And then the second year, you can come back and take electives that help you fill in the gaps that you've identified in that one-year internship that you need to be able to kind of round out your skill set and be an effective leader going forward. So the idea is to going straight through instead of working is to try and reduce those switching costs and reduce those opportunity costs to go straight through academically, supplement it with the work experience, and then continue on in the third year with the academic piece, and then have the MBA after those 3 years. In terms of the process, I would just echo everything everyone else has said. It's the same, largely the same MBA application. You are reviewed by in the same way by the same people who are reviewing the applications for people who have professional experience, and it's the same MBA program. So you were put in cohorts with everybody else. We were a class of 350. Silver Scholars are in that cohort, in those cohorts with all the students who have work experience. So in some cases, people don't know you're a Silver Scholar unless you say, but sometimes it's it's just that you don't have the same work experience that others do, but you bring other things to the table that those with work experience don't. So it's definitely the view is that everybody's contributing something to the Yale SRM experience.
Got it.
So I don't know.
Okay,
That was long and rambling. I don't know if there's
no,
other
that's
stuff like this.
super helpful, again, because your program's a little bit different. So I think it's really important to get that out in front. I do see a lot of really interesting questions cropping up in the Q&A, and I just want to remind everyone that each of these schools are going to go into their own Zoom breakouts at the end of this session, and be happy to kind of stick around and answer your questions. So just stay tuned for that. We'll get you the links to those Zoom breakouts when we get to the end of this session. Let's stick with Bruce, because I want to move into the next kind of phase of this discussion today and talk kind of where the rubber meets the road on the application process. And, I recognize your program is a little bit different, Bruce, but, you've got this essay, describe the biggest commitment you've ever made. I think it's the only essay that you guys ask, and it is the same question that you asked for the traditional MBA program as well. But I wonder if you could talk about this question, and particularly like any advice you have for a college student that's brainstorming about this. Do you find that Silver Scholar applicants sometimes make an attempt to sort of push this to be very grown up in terms of or professional in terms of the commitment that they're going to talk about, when maybe they could be better served by just talking about something more academic or extracurricular?
Yeah, it's funny. The word "grown up" was actually in my mind too, as you said that. So that definitely is something not pervasive, but I think there are sometimes people feel, when you're applying as a college senior, in your undergraduate, wanting to kind of highlight the professional part of your candidacy. And I'm sure we'll talk about this too in terms of how you evaluate. When you don't have professional experience, sometimes we do need to lean more on academics or test scores or other aspects of your application. So maybe there's a tendency to want to kind of highlight that thing that you don't have as much of. But I'm happy to sort of disabuse people of that misconception. In terms of our biggest commitment essay, it is our one essay. It's the same essay that everybody writes when they apply. It does not have to be professional. It can be personal. Silver Scholars are not at a disadvantage because they don't have work experience. People draw from all sorts of experiences and backgrounds, and by the time you're graduated from college, you certainly have made very large commitments in many different ways. And so you shouldn't feel as though you are in any way kind of at some disadvantage, as I said, or in more challenged in terms of writing this essay. And I would I don't want to go on, but I would emphasize, Graham, to that question about how to approach it and how we think about it. As I said, it doesn't have to be professional, it can be personal. it really, we're looking for a single commitment. Some people write about it kind of a philosophy that they have that then is demonstrated by in various ways. We really do want a single commitment, and we care. It's not meant to be, an explanation of with a theory behind it, but we really want to know what you've done to support that commitment, what you've done to demonstrate that commitment. And it really, the idea is to get a sense of, at Yale, we really do believe that our students do have a bias towards action, and that really we care about follow through, not that you're making a commitment, but they're actually following through on that commitment. So we want to see how you've done that in the commitment you've identified. We're not making value judgments about what's a valid or not valid commitment. We're not saying this is good, this is not. It's really more, not that we don't care what the commitment is, but we're agnostic in terms of sort of making those value judgments. We want to really know what you've done to demonstrate it. And I would say, I think those are the big things. I saw a question come up about word limit. Is a 500 word limit prompt. We're not counting so strictly. If you go a little bit over, don't feel like you need to be at like 498, 499 if we go a little bit over. But if you go to 1,000, that could be an issue. I think everyone would say that. We've seen enough of these. We know visually how much is 500 words. So if we see something that's vastly longer, that will register. But if it's a little over it, don't worry about it. And the last thing I would say for this one is sometimes people feel like they do need to answer the why MBA or why Yale because we don't ask that in an essay. You don't need to do that. This is just about the commitment. We prepared the application in a way that we ask different pieces of information at different points. You don't need to answer why MBA or why Yale here. We'll ask it to you elsewhere.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, appreciate you delving into this one because it's a kind of a, it's a big sort of philosophical question. And I think people sometimes, wonder what should I write about here? All right, so we're going reverse alphabetically now, just so we don't have any alphabet bias here. So we'll go with Jake over at Wharton. You have a couple of essay questions here, but I want to actually ask you a kind of more big picture question first, which is, I think the website still says this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that the program will accept a highly selective cohort of students whose academic and career interests expand the traditional notions of business education. And so I wonder if you could just expand on what do you mean by that, and how should applicants be using that language to sort of determine if this is the right program for them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think back to the first boss I ever had when I worked in admissions used to call phraseology like this bureaucratic mist. It's a lot of words that are hoping that any person really, no matter your academic background, no matter your personal background, no matter your professional interests, if that idea of making an impact, meaningful contribution, if you're hoping to be an effective leader, decision maker, innovator, if you identify by that, regardless of your background or what exactly is in your future, if that notion applies to you, we want this program to be something that you're interested in and that you pursue. So it's supposed to be a catch-all for people who are interested in orient themselves in that very broad sort of phraseology.
And you're bringing up something. You're reminding me of something that I can't remember who it was, but someone, a dean of admissions at a deferred enrollment program, once said to me that part of the reason that of opening up MBA offerings to this sort of to the college student community in a very kind of in this deferred way was just that, to try to make sure that business schools are capturing a broad group of candidates who might, because when you're a college student, you have other potential opportunities, many of which are immediate. Some people immediately would go off to law school or to do a master's in some other discipline, right? So I think part of this is opening up to the college community to say, hey, we want you to have work experience in most cases. Obviously with Yale, it's a little bit different, but they're saying we can get you in here quickly, and we want you to consider the power of management education and not forget about it just because traditionally you would have to go off and work or something. Jake, I want to stay with you and ask you a question about the essays.
Yeah.
How could younger, I mean, these are, folks applying and joining us today, they're younger than your traditional Wharton candidate who's worked already. I mean, they're in college, right? So I wanted to just see if you had any advice, because both questions involve a little bit of what I would call guesswork, in terms of what you're going to be doing in the future and how you might, be contributing to campus, things like that. So what do you recommend to someone in terms of, figuring that stuff out as they answer these questions?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked So one of the skills of really effective leaders, of people across all different industries, is just the ability to articulate vision and share how that vision may come about. Um, these are the same essay prompts, and our expectations for full-time MBA candidates applying through direct enrollment, those other rounds, non-deferred admissions rounds, we're looking for some clarity from them. But for college students with the same questions, you still have a direction in which you're facing professionally. And what's on the horizon might be a little hazy. You might not know exactly how to pinpoint it, but you know some of the steps you think you might take on the horizon, at least as you see it right now. All of these things are subject to change, but what we're trying to understand is, what is the vision you see when you are given this somewhat untangible future time and juncture, and how can you align, or how can you demonstrate that the Wharton programs align to helping support some of those professional goals? Or in terms of the community essay, we're just trying to see, how do you see yourself making impact in the communities in which you sit? So that could be, especially for those coming from a college environment, you've spent 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 or more years in an undergraduate or full-time master's community, and you've made contributions in classroom, in extracurricular involvements. And we're just trying to help understand, where have you made impact and where can you see yourself contributing similarly at Wharton? So both of these, you're just articulating a vision in the future. We're not going to bind you to that vision that you see, but your ability to articulate that with clarity, our back testing when we've looked at the successes of our current students, our alumni, is actually closely tied to that ability to articulate their interests and that vision and where it aligns to the program. So that's what we're trying to capture, but there's no pressure to be so specific in the deferred admission program for us.
Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think everyone tuning in should know that no matter what the program, I feel like, when you graduate from business school with an MBA, no one holds up your essays and says, you said you
Exactly.
wanted to be a consultant. Why are you taking this job at Amazon? Like, that doesn't happen, right? These things are malleable, and every school approaches this a little differently, but no one holds you to, the specifics when you're kind of gazing into the crystal ball, obviously. So appreciate that, Jake. Let's go to you, Donna. I wanted to ask a couple of questions with respect to MIT Sloan. The first of which is, and I'm sure you get this at all kinds of events, is that you all have this cover letter, which is unique to MIT Sloan. It's not unique to the working world, where we always write cover letters and send resumes, but it's unique to the MBA admissions process. And so I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that, and like, why is this format sort of useful to you all in admissions over at Sloan?
So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that it is something that we use in our professional lives, especially when, seeking a job. And so we thought, in the end, is it an essay? I would say yes. Is it an essay, though, that the format of it is really, or, the content is meant to be a cover letter? Yes. So I'm always surprised when I see headlines that say MIT Sloan eliminated its essay. That's really not quite the truth. I think this is the essay. And what I tell people is to look at the cover letter. You're also asked to do a personal video, 60 seconds, introducing yourself to your future classmates, and to submit a resume. Look at those three items together as a package that tells your story. Your resume, will tell your history. For people who are MBA, applying early, will tell us about involvement in clubs you may have been in while you were in school, and any internships you did. Your video is your personal side. What motivates you? What excites you? What are you passionate about? What gets you up in the morning? And the cover letter really ties it all together, and says, why MIT Sloan? It's 300 words. It can't possibly tell us everything, but like any other cover letter, it's telling us enough for us to want to know more. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's super helpful. I think, I don't know if you're willing, but, you know, I feel like we've talked about this in the past, and maybe it was on a podcast that you and I recorded, but, Bruce said earlier that they're not asking, why Yale SOM. And also, they're not sort of asking people in that commitment essay to explain their goals in any detail. I know you have a point of view on that stuff too. So I
Yep.
wanted to just, if you would like underline that.
Yep, yep. And I know I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit. So, definitely, I would not recommend taking up a lot of real estate here by copying sections of our website or even restating our mission statement, given that, we are a mission-driven school. However, in order to connect the dots and to tell a compelling story, there's probably a sentence or two about why who you are and what you're passionate about and what you're interested in aligns really well with what MIT Sloan has to offer. So it all comes together. But again, that's not taking chunks out of the website. That's a sentence or a phrase or two that really is meant to tie it all together.
Okay.
And it's similar to Bruce, and I love the way Bruce said this, we aren't counting words. It's 300 words. If it's 310, 320, all that's fine. We also have spent enough time looking at them to know that if we have to keep on swiping, you've probably written too much.
Yeah, we used to, I guess we still say this somewhere on the Clear Admit website that, if you submit an essay that's twice as long as what's been recommended, you might risk suggesting to the admissions committee that you feel that you're twice as important as everyone else who followed the rules. So that's probably a good, good rule of thumb. The other question I had for you, Dawn, is about this video piece that you mentioned. So I know, the video assignment, I believe, is, sort of introduce yourselves to your future classmates. And because in this case that when someone's applying to MIT Sloan from the workforce, they have a lot to talk about in terms of, they'd be starting business school like within a year. In this case, they might not be meeting these future classmates for a handful of years. And so any advice there as to like how the
Yep.
candidate might tackle that?
Yep, let me talk about a couple of basics here. First and foremost, we are not expecting this to be Oscar quality by any means. So really, using your phone, using, a friend's phone, having somebody hold it for you, that's all we're really expecting. Have people gotten a little creative over the years? Absolutely. In some cases, a way to reinforce a passion or an interest. I do want to warn you though, please don't do that at the cost of the quality of the audio and our ability to be able to hear it. And a quick example is a few years ago, we had a lot of people who were passionate about skiing, and many of them would send us their videos either from the top of the mountain or on a chairlift. And while that was very creative, and especially in this Olympics year, it's even, very relevant, if we couldn't hear what they were saying, the purpose of the video. So please make sure that you do not compromise the audio. Beyond that, it's really up to you. I do have to say though, you want to make sure it's compelling. And this just reminded me of one other video I watched, that somebody loved to bake, and they literally, their whole video was just us watching a loaf of bread rise in their oven. And I thought it was going to be like an I Love Lucy ending where like the bread got so big it popped out of the oven or something. It never happened. So but the reality is, there are really, no right or wrong videos. We do watch them all. There's been some rumors out there that, surfacing that, don't put too much time into it because nobody watches them. That could not be the furthest thing from the truth at all. We absolutely watch videos. And so, feel free though to, tell us who you are. If like you're a senior in college, so what are you interested in? What are you passionate about? What were you involved in clubs? Were you involved in sports, athletics? Were you involved in theater? Anything that you would want your new best friends, all 400 of them to know about you.
Okay, perfect. And actually, you're reminding me of something that I love about MBA admissions, and that is quite different from other, professional degrees and really the world over. And that is this holistic nature of the process. I think there are institutions where, we look at the numbers, and if the numbers don't meet a threshold, we're just not even looking at the file, and that's not true. So I really want to stress that for everyone tuning in today. Your file will be not only read in its entirety, but I think, and I'm call me out on this, everyone, if I'm wrong, I think it will be read in its entirety by more than one person as a part of this process. So you get a lot of time with the committee, and that's why these folks work such long hours and read so many files. Catherine, you've been super patient as we went backwards through the alphabet this time. So I do want to talk with you a little bit about the Darden Future Year Scholars application. You guys make it a point of referring to your essays as short answers. And I think that's because for the most part, they're pretty short. And there are a number of them. I think we have 2 slides worth because I think they're 5 total, and you've got some, you can pick from one or the other. So I wanted to kind of dive in on this, and we'll start with this first question, which is the learning team question. And I wondered, like, do you have any specific tips for a college student trying to answer this question? Only because, again, this may involve a little bit of crystal ball gazing, especially if the candidate is hoping to add skills and experiences to their profile before they show up on campus in several years. So, like, what's your advice here? How should someone tackle this?
Sure. So the learning team essay, the most important thing for you to know is what a learning team is. So learning teams are a central part of the Darden experience. And so it's a group of 6 students assigned to you by the school. And every student will have worked in a different industry, a different job function, students who come from different ethnicities, countries of origin, et cetera. And you're going to be meeting with that group of students for about 2 hours Sunday through Wednesday evenings to prepare 3 cases for class each day. And these teams are going to be sticking together throughout the duration of the core curriculum, which is almost the entirety of your first year. So another way to think about this question is, if you are going to be spending so much time with this group of people, what is important for them to know about you? And the question does say that is not going to be on your resume. So is there something from your background that has really shaped the way you see the world that you think would be important for this group of people to know about you? Or is there a particular role that you gravitate toward on a team and you can provide examples from your past to illustrate that trait? Or are you going to be the person on the team who coordinates group runs during exams, or who has everyone over after a tough week to unwind? We're hoping to learn a little bit more about what you'll bring to the Darden community through this short essay.
Okay, super helpful, and I appreciate you explaining the concept of the learning team. Sometimes I forget some of this, the basic stuff here, because I went to business school and we had learning teams, so it's sort of part of the the vernacular. Let's talk about the career goals essay, or I guess that's what I would refer to it, and I think it's on the next slide here. So yeah, it's sort of this, again, what are you looking for in a response? Sort of how does the MBA fit into your career plan? Um, is does it make sense for applicants to explain like a really planned career path? And if so, like what level of specificity are you looking for in terms of, again, because they're going to have to project a little bit, right?
Yeah, so I have no expectation that someone fully knows what they're going to be doing 5 years from now. I don't know what I'm going to be doing 5 years from now. So no expectation for you to have everything mapped out. But there are 2 things that we are looking to see in a response. I would say the first is self-awareness, and the second is thoughtfulness. So while we don't need you to have the next 5 years charted out, we do need you to understand some of your strengths and your interests that you have identified in yourself over the past 4 years or so, and be able to explain how you see these strengths of yours and these interests of yours leading you to an MBA in the future. There were some questions in the Q&A today around how does admissions think about these experiences in my life, or this accomplishment in my life, or these classes that I took. And the answer, I can speak for all of us, I believe, is that we're going to be thinking about all of those things in the context of the larger story that you're telling about where you've been and where you're going. And so this is the opportunity to share part of that story.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate you shedding some light on that. I think this is one of the challenges for, anyone who's in university trying to figure out their path to business school. And I mean, I think there are some instances, I assume, where current seniors may already have, job offers from they did a summer internship somewhere and they now have an offer to go work somewhere. And so they have things sort of buttoned up a bit. But then there are probably others who are still, trying to figure out what's that next step, but they know an MBA is further down the road and they want to apply to these programs. So really helpful to hear from you on that. If you guys will indulge me, I want to spend the last 10 minutes that we have here with some what we call lightning round questions. We'll stay with you, Catherine. I want you to describe your student community in 3 words.
So the three words I would choose are compassionate, humble, and bright.
Okay, excellent. Let's go to you, Donna. What would you say for MIT Sloan?
Collaborative, inventive, and impactful.
Excellent. Now I know Jake and Bruce, you guys are at a disadvantage as we go down here because they're picking a lot of good adjectives. Jake, how about you? What about Wharton?
I'll take a different approach and I'll just say they leave Wharton better.
Okay, excellent. Bruce?
Gosh, I'm pulling up the right. Catherine took one of mine. I would say, I think humble, curious, and optimistic.
Okay, excellent. All right, so the next and I think final lightning round question we have today is I want to know one thing that deferred enrollment candidates can do to stand out in your admissions process. And Bruce, let's just stay with you. Any advice that you have on this one?
And my advice would be don't try to stand out. That's the best way to stand out. That usually does not go well, is what I would
Right.
say.
Okay. All right. How about you, Jake?
Yeah, can only agree with Bruce. I'll just say the collection of every component of an application makes somebody stand out and makes them unique. Any one part never is the standout. So just
Okay.
trust the application.
Excellent. Donna, how about you?
Oh, this is tough. I guess I would say in support of what Jake just said, feel free to have a friend who knows you really well, read what you've written and ask them if it accurately reflects who you are.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And there's just a huge value in getting someone who knows you well to look over what you're going to submit. And I would say maybe not mom and dad, because mom and dad are going to say that you're fantastic. I mean, that's their job. But I think a close friend, as Donna suggests, can be super helpful because they know you and you do want your authentic self to come through as you apply to these programs. So, Catherine, anything on your mind when it comes to deferred enrollment candidates standing out in your process?
Yeah, I do want to third what Bruce said about not stand out, but I would also add that I think it's important to talk to current students that are in these different programs about their reasons for pursuing an MBA, whether or not it was a deferred path or not. Just why are they getting an MBA and their reason for the school they chose and their career path. Having those conversations will give you a lot more thought on your application, and your application, I think, will stand out a little bit more if you have that depth of understanding when you apply.
So I want to put you guys on the spot because Catherine's making a really good point. I want to know, to what extent is it possible for a current college student or maybe someone in a master's who's thinking about deferred enrollment to connect not just with a kind of current MBA, but maybe a current MBA who has followed this path to business school? Is that like, do you all have ambassadors that are specific to that? And I recognize for some of you, your programs are newer. And so maybe, you don't have a ton of people yet who've come through because I know Yale's been around for a really long time, but that's not the case for everyone on this panel in terms of deferred enrollment. But yeah, maybe just, does anyone have anything they want to say on this? Feel free to just sort of chime in here or raise your hand.
I think you hit it exactly right. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We're just in our first group of people who are eligible to actually start their MBA, and it's a very small number.
Yeah.
So stay
Okay.
tuned, I guess would be the answer.
And I know at Silver Scholars at Yale, even though it's been around for 20 some years, it's a really small group, a fairly small group of students. So I don't know if you have specific ambassadors that are Silver Scholars, like that's their, their job is to talk to Silver Scholars folks.
We do. So if you go,
Okay.
I think most of us have, our student ambassador webpage, and Silver Scholars is one of the dimensions on which you can sort to find someone to be in touch with. And it is small, but it's grown. It started out,
Yeah.
I think most, as with these other programs, started out Yale only. Now it's open to everybody around the world. And it's grown, from sort of, 15 to 20 to, I can't remember where we are now, but it's definitely much larger than it has been. So there is a cohort in place to speak to you.
Okay, good. Anything with respect to Darden? Are there specific ambassadors that are kind of focused on the future scholars side of it?
Yeah, so we do not have them yet, but in the next couple of months we will. We have
Okay, so it's in
a
the
bulk
works.
now.
Okay, Jake, how about with your program?
So there's only 4 total Molus Fellows currently in the MBA program. So what I recommend, Rayhan Ayrton, who's a first-year Molus Fellow in the program, he was interviewed by Fortune Education earlier this year, and they put out a piece about him, and he talked a little bit about his reasons and those experiences. And then they're not posted yet, but in the next couple of weeks, over the course of the next month, we're planning to have a couple broader info sessions. So while we don't have one-on-one ambassadors, we're going to try to get some of those early voices in a way that's scalable for
Okay.
people to talk to many.
Excellent. Okay. So what we're going to do next is, I know we have these sort of individual breakouts lined up for, I believe, Wharton and Darden and Yale. I think Donna has a commitment that she's got to run to. But Donna, I don't know if you wanted to just offer up the email address for Sloan that people can reach out to if they have specific questions that they want to connect with your team on. But you could do that if that's useful. I think that,
I'm happy to. I'll put it in the chat right now.
okay. So yeah, if people have Sloan specific questions, Donna's got to run to a meeting, but you can email and someone on our team will get in touch with you. Obviously, they'll be thrilled to hear from you. Other than that, we're going to let Bruce and Jake and Catherine disappear off into their individual Zooms. I did want to thank them for their time. Obviously, always a pleasure having you guys. And yeah, so we'll let them head off and just stick with us here. We're going to get you the links to those rooms so you can join those schools and chat with them. And thanks, Donna, so much for putting the email into the chat there. But yeah, we'll let everyone sign off. Appreciate you guys making time today. And yeah, enjoy answering questions from everyone who's here with us as they venture into your Zoom breakouts.
Thanks so much, Graham.
Sure. So those of you still tuned in here, don't jump off just yet. We're going to get you links so that you can go and hang out with Bruce or Catherine or Jake if you want to talk Wharton, Darden, Yale stuff and get your questions answered. We do want to give them just a minute to go and get set up in their breakout rooms before you bombard them with your questions. And while they're doing that, I just wanted to highlight a couple of basic tips. Some of you were here last week. We had a group of 4 other schools, so this may be old hat for some of you. But I did want to stress that, with these deferred enrollment programs, we do see that candidates who have a lot of success typically have, good numbers. So they've performed well in undergrad. They do well on a standardized test if they're taking one, which is the case for most of these programs. I would also suggest that even though you're not working, at least full-time in most cases, you do have opportunities to showcase your leadership skills, and that's usually through on-campus involvement, whether it's sports or clubs or whatever you might get involved with outside of the classroom. Take advantage of that stuff and feel free to use it in your essays and other materials. Make sure you're also looking beyond just professors for recommendations. Most of the schools give you a lot of specific kind of advice on this, but you don't have to use professors. You could use someone who was, a supervisor at a summer internship, or if you have an advisor on campus who's really well attuned to not only your academic work, but also everything you've been doing as a student on campus, like maybe you're running events or planning conferences. All that matters and can be showcased in your recommendation letters. And then a couple other quick points is that we talked about this just now, but make sure you engage the community of these programs as you do your research. And that means reaching out to student ambassadors, talk with people who have done the MBA at these programs or are currently in these programs. It'll help your essays. It'll help when you go to interview to have these kind of anecdotes to share and little details that show that you're really interested and that you're not just going through the motions of applying, but you've taken the time to get to know these programs. And the last thing I would say, and this should be obvious, is demonstrate maturity. And the reason I say that is because all of your admissions readers are very used to reading applications from people who are 26, 27, 28 years old with 3 to 5 years of work experience. And so they're a little further down the line. And in many cases, these deferred programs are a little bit new. And so they're getting used to reading files from college students. And so I think that to whatever extent you can showcase maturity, in terms of your career plan or just having a good sense of self will go a long way in convincing these schools that you're ready to get a deferred seat. So the breakouts are going to get started now. So if you have your questions, I'm sure that all of our panelists who are heading off to receive your questions will be thrilled to hear from you. You'll see if you jump into the breakouts, which we'll post here in the chat, that there'll be a waiting room and they'll let you in within a matter of moments and start taking your questions. I really appreciate you guys joining us today. It's been a real pleasure having these schools with us, and hopefully we've shed some light on a process for you all as you navigate it. And thanks so much for just joining us and being a part of the Clear Admit community.